Welcome back, everyone. All right, let's dive right into this explainer on Chapter 25 of Nāgārjuna's Mūlamadhyamakakārikā. Today, we're going to definitively resolve one of the biggest philosophical paradoxes out there, the relationship between samsara and nirvana. Now, if you've been following our previous breakdowns, you already know the terrain. But this chapter, this is where the whole thing culminates. We're going to see exactly how emptiness doesn't destroy the concept of liberation, but actually literally makes it possible. So we start right out of the gate with the opponent throwing down a classic nihilistic challenge in verse 1. They're basically asking, look, if everything is empty, meaning there's no inherent origination and no inherent cessation, then isn't liberation fundamentally impossible? I mean, what exactly are we being liberated from if nothing inherently exists to begin with? It's a fair question, right? To figure this out, here's our philosophical roadmap for today. We'll start with the opponent's challenge, then deconstruct the triad of bondage and liberation, look at the union of two truths, scale it up with the generalized tetralemma, see the middle way in action, and finally, fundamentally redefine what nirvana actually is. All right, part 1, the opponent's challenge, or what we can call the nihilistic trap. The opponent falls into a super common trap here by mistakenly conflating emptiness with total, absolute non-existence. They genuinely think emptiness denies all causality, origination, and cessation. By their logic, if there's no inherent suffering to cease, nirvana just can't happen. And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast between two major frameworks. On one side, you've got the dualistic Abhidharma view. This treats samsara as conditioned suffering and nirvana as an unconditioned, real state of escape, like you eradicate the defilements, break the chain, and arrive at this totally separate place of peace. But on the flip side, we have Nāgārjuna's non-dual Madhyamaka approach. He argues that samsara and nirvana are both empty, entirely interdependent, and ultimately not inherently different from one another. Moving on to part 2, deconstructing the triad. Let's look at steps 1 through 4 of our Madhyamaka reasoning and break down the concepts of bondage, relation, and liberation. So step 1 is just identifying these 3 spheres of the ontological framework that the opponent incorrectly assumes are inherently real. First, bondage, or samsara. Second, the relation, opposition, or union between states. And third, liberation, or nirvana. Now, the Abhidharma views these as concrete, solid realities. But Nāgārjuna, he takes a completely different path. Applying our next 3 steps, we completely deconstruct these spheres. Step 2 is the tetralemma. We look at these 3 spheres and see they cannot be inherently existent, they cannot be completely non-existent, they can't be both, and they can't be neither. They also can't be totally different or entirely identical. Step 3 is emptiness. Because they fail the tetralemma, these spheres are completely empty of inherent existence. They don't have real limits, no solid center, no true beginning, middle, or end. Which leads right into step 4, dependent origination. Because they are empty, they are dependently co-arisen. Samsara and nirvana are interdependent, co-defined, and co-imputed by the mind. They're basically mere designations, conventional tools and maps, but they are never the territory itself. Part 3, the union of two truths, covering steps 5 and 6. The really crucial point here is how we reconcile this emptiness with everyday conventional reality. Step 5 asks us to notice this union regarding our 3 spheres: conventional truths, which operate via dependent origination, and the ultimate truth, which is emptiness. Well, they are perfectly inseparable. They're co-emergent. Their apparent opposition completely collapses because one truth actually supports and energizes the other. Conventional reality functions precisely because it's empty of any inherent, rigid essence. And that brings us to step 6. Because of this profound union, the 3 spheres of samsara, relation, and nirvana are illusory. Think of them like reflections, mirages, dreams, or echoes. They are present, they're functional, we experience them, sure, yet they are entirely insubstantial. They're kinda there, yet not there. Let's jump into part 4, the generalized tetralemma, where we transcend conceptual proliferations. Now, what's really fascinating here is how Nāgārjuna scales his logic up for step 7 to shatter all dualistic conceptual proliferations, what's known as prapancha. We can actually apply this generalized tetralemma to absolutely any duality you can think of. The 3 spheres are not this, they're not non-this, not both, and definitely not neither. They aren't existence or non-existence, functionality or non-functionality, difference or identity, separation or union. multiplicity or oneness. We're talking permanence or impermanence, continuity or discontinuity, eternity or annihilation, finitude or infinity. Nope to all of them. They are not chopping wood or not chopping wood, carrying water or not carrying water, movement or stillness, noise or silence. Not conceptual or non-conceptual, describable or indescribable, conceivable or inconceivable. Not with models or without models, dependent origination only or emptiness only. You see where this is going? We transcend these massive dualities completely, meaning reality is beyond all conditioned models, entirely free from these conceptual models. All right, part 5, the middle way in action, steps 9 through 11. So, what does this profound non-duality actually mean for a practitioner navigating everyday life? Well, step 9 points us straight to the middle way. It's a path utterly free from all extremes, neither this nor non-this, and free from the middle too, neither both nor neither. What this means on a practical level is there is absolutely nothing to accept, seek, or affirm in absolute terms, and nothing to reject, abandon, or negate in absolute terms either. There's no inherent impurity that you somehow need to purify. It literally frees us from striving after illusions as if they were ultimate realities. So, step 10 introduces the practice of acting without acting. We use the spheres of samsara and nirvana and all our conceptual maps conventionally. We still walk, talk, carry water, and chop wood, but we do it without absolute attachment. We stay fully aware of their empty nature. We act without apprehending anything as an absolute, engaging smoothly in accord with reality as it is, suchness, just as pointed out by the union of the two truths. And step 11 is perceiving everything as primordially equal, perfect, and complete. As verses 19 and 20 explicitly state, there is not the slightest difference between cyclic existence, samsara, and nirvana. Their limits are exactly the same. Everything is one in the non-dual sense. Not many, not one, not both, and not neither. Which brings us to part 6. What is nirvana exactly? Redefining liberation. Let's dive into the ultimate conclusion of chapter 25. If samsara and nirvana are primordially equal, what exactly is nirvana then? We have to return to the opponent's initial fear. Does emptiness completely deny the possibility of nirvana? Like, does it mean liberation is just a myth, or have we just been looking at it through the wrong lens entirely? Well, emptiness absolutely doesn't negate nirvana. In fact, emptiness is the exact framework that makes liberation possible. Think about it. If things had a rigid, inherent existence, no transformation or cessation could ever happen. But here is where we need to be incredibly precise, and I really gotta insist on this point. Nirvana is not about dropping all movement for stillness. It is not dropping talking for silence or thinking for not thinking. It is absolutely not the rejection of feeling, dualities, triads, concepts, models, or maps. It's not some escape from living or an escape from chopping wood and carrying water. It is definitely not a passive retreat into a void. Instead, nirvana is the salutary cessation of prapancha, that dualistic conceptual proliferation we talked about earlier. It's simply transcending the urge to accept these dualistic phenomena as inherently real. It's ceasing to try to force the limitless, centralist flow of the river into neat little boxes properly labeled and ordered. Simply put, it is ceasing to take the maps for the territory. A Buddhist still uses dualistic concepts and still chops wood, but does so with a liberated awareness, acting without acting, completely free from any absolutes. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. Nirvana isn't some distant shore. It's a profound shift in how you see the world right where you stand. So if the map is truly not the territory, how will you act without acting in your own life today? How will you carry water and chop wood, fully engaged in the flow of the river, without ever mistaking your concepts for absolute reality?